Welcome back to this week's episode of the State of Recruiting, your weekly Horns 24/7 recruiting podcast. I'm Mike Roach, and I'm joined, as always, going forward by Hudson Standish. We've got a big show. It's a huge weekend in Austin. We got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about visitors. We're going to talk a little bit about Texas relays. We're going to talk about what the overall ceiling for this class could be. But before we do all of those things, Hudson, how's it going?
It's going great, Mike. I knocked off a little bit of podcast rest last week, so I'm excited to move forward.
There we go. We're going to get you loose and in the groove in no time. All right. Let's jump right into it. It's kind of the weekend Texas fans have been waiting for all spring. The big visit weekend for Texas with the first week of spring practice coming. And none other than Arch Manning, the five-star quarterback from New Orleans, Isidore Newman, is coming in for his third visit of his recruitment to Texas. Visited last summer for the Elite Day, came in fall for the Oklahoma State game, and is returning this week. It's always a circus when Arch is on campus, you know. And I don't think that's by his design at all. He's a very low-key kid, but just the hype around his name and his family's name and all those sorts of things have made this such a high-profile recruitment. I guess I'm interested, Hudson. You and I have not talked a lot about Arch Manning on this show because you've only been on it for 2 weeks, but what are your thoughts on him as a player? And I guess this is kind of your first foray into like a mega recruitment.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting watching his recruitment from afar as a consumer. And then once I got into the industry, starting to cover it a little bit. I mean, it's really fun. A lot of the coverage that I've had with Arch Manning has kind of been secondary. So it's been a guy like Jonte Cook or Reuben Owens or even a Jonah Wilson being like, yeah, Arch is telling me this. And this is what I think, or just the insane amount of buzz that kids that are only tangentially related to him feel. I mean, Mike, we were at Pylon Dallas this last weekend, and how many times did you hear a kid say, not I'm going to Texas on the March 26th weekend. No, I'm going to Texas on the Arch weekend. So that level of buzz has been really exciting for me as a, new person in the industry to kind of follow. And then as far as him as a player, I mean, he's as polished of a quarterback as you would expect a Manning to be. He's really fantastic. His arm talent is great. He gets through his progressions easily. He has that poise in the pocket. He's just a really solid high floor quarterback at this level. And I think that he and, Malachi Nelson are kind of duke it out at 1 and 2 for the rest of the 23 cycle.
I think there's been a lot of, and I always say that if your kid gets ranked high really early, it's kind of a negative because everybody spends the rest of those years trying to figure out how to dig him for something, right? Like I saw it with Noah Cain when he was a really highly ranked running back, and all it was for his last 2 years, people being like, well, he can't do this and he can't do that. And, I think that there's been this growing sentiment in the industry that's like, well, if his last name wasn't Manning, he wouldn't be the number 1 overall quarterback. And while I still I would love to see him against a team with a pulse live. I saw him against maybe the worst high school football team in America last year. And it just wasn't, it was a practice, basically. It was a scrimmage, not even a scrimmage. It looked like routes on air. But when you talk about his polish, and you talk to his coach, Nelson Stewart, and you understand everything that goes into it on the mental side of his ability, along with his talent. This is a kid who I do think could be a special quarterback for a program. It is a kid that I think, because of who he is, his last name and his pedigree, I don't think you can say if his last name wasn't Manning, because that is part of the whole package, right? Like, he has grown up in that world and in that family. And, I think when you look at Malachi Nelson and the top 3 quarterbacks, Arch, Malachi Nelson, and Nicholas Almaliva, if those 3 guys develop to where we think they can, and say they're 1, 2, 3 going into the draft, who is an NFL team going to take? Probably the guy with the last name Manning, if they're all things equal. So I do think I would love to see a little more from Arch. Not because the bad thing is, like when I went to see him last spring, I didn't get to see him throw in that practice because he was hurt. So I've really only seen him throw in a game that, frankly, there was no competition in. But I mean, I think it's a little premature to just say, oh, he's only here because his last name's Manning.
For sure. And then an element too is because Arch doesn't really do the 7-on-7 circuit or even the camp circuit to a certain extent, it does limit how much evaluators can see him, and it can work for and against him a little bit. But I think that's another reason people have a little bit of skepticism. Like everybody would love to see what he looks like directly competing against Malachi and Nico Imaliva at an Elite 11 type situation, but you're just not going to get him in that sort of competition.
Aside from Arch Manning, there's a lot of other big names. I mean, if Arch wasn't coming this weekend, it would still be a massive visitor weekend. Just some of the headliners as I'm looking down the list here. We have the full list over on horns247.com. We will have we've got a preview out. If you're reading or if you're watching this or listening to this Friday morning when the show drops, we will have a preview out of the whole weekend. But Ruben Owens, 5-star running back from El Campo, the sock corners, Malik Muhammad and Javon Thomas are both competing in Texas relays and will be there. Roderick Pleasant is competing, the corner from Junipero Serra in Gardenia, where Malik Murphy came from, is competing in Texas relays and will be there. David Hicks, the 5-star defensive lineman from Allen, is supposed to be competing in Texas relays and will be in attendance. Texas getting a big group of offensive linemen in: Ian Reed, Jaden Chapman, Andre Kojo, Connor Stroh, kind of their the core of those guys they're really chasing in the state of Texas right now. Cedric Baxter, an elite running back from Orlando, is supposed to be in attendance. Jonte Cook is slated to be there. Jaden Greathouse. The list goes on and on. What stands out to you about the rest of these names on the list?
Yeah, I think the major one for me is that they're getting the number one player in the nation on campus in Arch Manning, and they're getting the number one player in the state of Texas back on campus in DJ Hicks. And I think that DJ Hicks is someone that most in the industry feel like is an Oklahoma, Texas A&M battle right now with national powers kind of on the outskirts. I think that's a major one to where if Texas through Arch and a lot of the other hype of this weekend can really get back in it for the state's number one player, I think that would be a major move. Other than that, both of the sock corners, huge fans of. I think that's a really big deal. And the offensive line group that they have, it's a lot of the targets that Texas views as takes and, has a chance to maybe extend a lead in some of those spots.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point about Hicks, because we've seen it in the past where with like Javian Taviano coming in on junior day and that kind of reviving the Texas recruitment. I think that this is an opportunity for Texas to kind of revive themselves. Now, it depends on how long I think Hicks is there and how much he gives it a chance. If it's just I'm going to stop by the building when I'm done with my track meet, who knows? But if he really, gives the visit a chance, and here's what I know on Hicks. When he was first offered, we were told by multiple people very close to him, hey, Texas is a dream school. They're going to be very tough to beat if they offer. And it's kind of gone the other way since that started. From what I understand, Hicks visited last summer on like the second day visits were allowed. This staff had never had a visit before. They had together. I mean, they had a facility in shambles as construction was going on. They were trying to get 1 million kids in and out. And I think that first visit for Hicks just didn't go off maybe like he thought it would. And I think that the staff kind of found their footing through the summer, kind of seeing what worked with visits and what didn't. He came back again, and I think it was for the Kansas game. So obviously not a great experience. I really think they need something where they can get him in a place, have some real quality time with the staff, and really lock in on this one because it is a very important recruitment at a position that could be a huge impact. I guess, if you're looking at this list, if I'm wondering if there's any commit candidates coming out of this list, I'm not saying anything will come out of this weekend necessarily, but if a kid commits in a month, this might be the kind of catalyst for that. So as I look down this list, the only one that I really would probably feel good about saying is Jonah Wilson from Duquesne. Now I could also see Jaden Greathouse.
That
Uh,
was the one that I was going to mention. Jaden Greathouse was the other one that maybe could,
yeah,
if everything goes great.
I think Jamal Shaw as well is another one. Those three guys I could look at and say, okay, this could be a big weekend where you could close the deal coming out of it and getting them. Let's talk a little bit about those kind of guys. With Greathouse, obviously, a decorated guy since his freshman season at Austin Westlake went crazy in the state finals last year. I think another guy who, again, started out highly ranked early. A lot of people took a lot of time to tell you what he couldn't do. And I
Yep.
think all he did last year, and he capped it off with the 6A state final, was show you what he could do.
Yeah, it's crazy that Jaden Greathouse's career has already had such a kind of roller coaster ride. Not from his perspective, from if you're just objectively looking at Jaden Greathouse's high school football career, it's 3 years of excellence and 3 state titles. But when you look at it from an evaluation standpoint, people thought, okay, this freshman that's catching all these jump balls for this Westlake team, he'll probably grow into a tight end. Sophomore year, he didn't really grow much. And so people kind of started to knock him a little bit in the industry of, okay, he's a tweener. Like you said, they were talking more about what he couldn't do. He's not going to be a burner. All he did his junior year was light up everybody. It did not matter who the team was. Mike, you and I really loved that Denton Geyer secondary. I think that it was the best secondary in the state last year. And Jaden Greathouse just basically took whoever he wanted in that state final. So, I mean, as a player, yeah, he is a little bit of a tweener, but some call it a tweener, some would take the glass half full and say that he's just a hybrid that you can put in the slot and he's gonna, cause a lot of problems for people. I don't think that he's not as tall, and I think he has a little bit more quick twitch than like a little Jordan Humphrey, but I don't see why you couldn't make great Jaden Greathouse a ridiculously productive college football player.
Yeah, all it takes is a little offensive imagination, right? And
Absolutely.
surely, Sark's got the reputation for that. I think having a guy like Brennan Marion in the room who is known for, really being a creative offensive mind could help with that as well. Move him around, isolate him on linebackers and safeties, and try to get the matchup in your favor. And I think that when you look at that kid, he wins. He wins jump balls, he wins games, he wins championships, and you're right, that Denton Geyer secondary was 4 Power 5 level players, playing in it, and there wasn't one of them that could stay with him. So, I think, to me, that was probably the biggest thing I took away from state was, oh, not only is Jaden Greathouse, like, better than people are giving him credit for, he has potential to really go off and do it in a way of, like, I mean, he was going deep ball after deep ball in that game. The guys couldn't run with him. So, I think he answered a lot of questions. Jonah Wilson, another from Duquesne, another big bodied wide receiver that Brennan Marion offered. This is one I think a little different than Greathouse. A ton of potential, but maybe hasn't put it together consistently on the field a lot. Now, we saw him early. I remember sitting in a press box 2 years ago during COVID, during small school state, and had the stream on watching Bridgeland and Duquesne that year, and he went nuts in that game, and then that's kind of when we first noticed him. Now, there's times we see him in camps or 7-on-7, and he's incredible. He's freaky. He's got a big body. He moves it well. He can go get the ball. But there's also times where he struggles with consistency. I do think that Texas loves the potential there. They saw him play basketball this offseason, and that's kind of when they offered, was when they saw him able to move that big body on the court. And so I think that, for him, he's kind of a big upside play for them.
Absolutely, Mike. I completely agree. And that Bridgeland game is hard to get out of your mind because I cannot remember the exact stat total, but it felt like he had 200 plus yards with 3 touchdowns against a Bridgeland team that was expected to make a run. A lot of his struggles at the high school level, too, have been a little bit due to the fact that quarterback play hasn't been super consistent at Spring Duquesne. And at times he's even had to step up into the QB role. So there's a little bit of maybe not being in the best offensive setup that has kind of hurt him a little bit from a perception standpoint. But it's one of those things to where the Texas staff felt confident in his upside and, his overall traits to take a shot and really pursue him as that, X receiver that Brennan Marion really, covets.
And then Jamal Shaw from West Orange Stark, who plays running back and second and defensive back at West Orange, I think looked at as a defensive back from Texas, possible corner, possible nickel type guy. I haven't been able to see a ton of him. Hudson, you are the Southeast Texas expert on the podcast, so why don't you give me your opinion of Jamal Shaw?
Yeah, Jamal Shaw is a district, I wouldn't say rival because I don't think Liberty has ever beaten West Orange Stark, but my hometown Liberty Panthers, he kind of victimized us this past year. And mostly Jamal plays primarily at the high school level as a running back, but it's easy to see his physical running style translating to the defensive backfield. And he has enough on tape as a defensive back that you can definitely see why Texas, led by area recruiter Bo Davis, interestingly enough, decided to pull the trigger on an offer. And, the Texas staff really likes him as a player.
Yeah, I think that's one of those ones too where weren't afraid to get out there and be among the first to recruiting, and it's kind of been a staple for this Texas staff. It's been refreshing to see a little bit. They've kind of gone in early on guys that they truly believe in, and it's paid off for them in a lot of cases, especially with those offensive linemen we mentioned. All right, we're also going to be there for Texas relays. If you're listening to this on Friday, the release day, Hudson and I are likely either on the way to or already in Austin to cover the massive track event that it feels like it's coming back to being a big event again. I mean, for years, Texas Relays was talked about as kind of one of the premier spring events in the state. In the last couple of years, it hasn't had as much heat for whatever reason. I don't know a ton about the college track and field scene, so I can't tell you why that is. But this year, a lot of guys running in it. Hudson, what are you excited to see this weekend at Relays?
I'm excited for the entire spectacle. Obviously, we're there to cover recruiting. We're there to, look at a lot of the guys that we already know about, the, Javon Thomas, Malik Muhammad types, the Roderick Pleasants of the world. But there's also an element to where, like you said, it's just the spectacle of Texas relays kind of feels back. I mean, you've got national high school teams coming in. The Miami Northwest, team is headed in. So overall, that's the thing that I'm most excited about seeing. Other than that, a kid that I am pretty excited. I believe that Bravion Rogers is going to compete, and he recently just posted a 6'9" high jump and thinks that he can get to 6'10". Again, for those not as familiar with LaGrange's Bravion Rogers, he's a 6-foot corner and is borderline high jumping 6'10". So that just shows what type of a freak athlete he is. And I'm excited to watch him compete. I'm trying to think anybody else. DJ Hicks is throwing, so I'm excited to see him. And yeah, Mike, are there any other names off the top of your head that I'm missing out on?
Roderick Pleasant for me. I mean, Roderick Pleasant is a legit could touch 10 even in the 100. I mean, he's that fast, and he's a very good football player. I don't want to say he's a track kid because when you say he's a track kid, it kind of denotes that they're not a good football player. I don't think that's the case at all, but he is very much into track. It's kind of his passion, and he told me, he kind of looks up to Adoree Jackson, who came out of Sarah, ran 10 flat and was a receiver in DB. That's kind of what Roderick Pleasant is. He's got lofty goals and he's really been flying this season. So excited to see him. I got a chance to get to know him just being around Malik Murphy and going out to California so much last year. I got a chance to know Roderick, and he's a really cool kid. He's really excited about coming to Texas and running. He told me he hopes that Malik's done with practice and can come support him in time, for everything. So really nice kid. And he looks up to Malik Murphy like a bigger brother. So I think that would be a really cool moment for him if Malik was able to watch him run at Texas. And I'm excited to see kind of what he does because he does have potential to really light up that board. There's also going to be some big teams in town. You mentioned Miami Northwestern. Duncanville is going to be there. Their 4x1 ran a 40.45 last week. along with I can't remember the other two. I think Fort Bend Marshall was one of them, and somebody
Yeah.
else that went top three, all under
Summer
41.
Creek.
Yeah, it may have been Summer Creek. All went under 41 in the 4x1, which is just absolutely rolling. So that's what I'm excited to see the speed. Seeing some of these. I love like we don't place a ton of emphasis into them because it's hard from an evaluation standpoint. But I love relays. Like I love
Yeah.
watching a good relay team, and so watching some of these like really fast 4x1 and 4x2 teams, I'm pumped to see. All right, we are going to take a short break if you're listening on the podcast, and then we were going to come back and talk a little bit about the ceiling of this class. If you're watching on the Horns 24/7 YouTube page, you won't notice a break. All right, Hudson. The we talked a lot about Arch Manning. We've talked a lot about the visitors coming in this weekend. What One thing you and I have been kicking around is what is the ceiling for this class? And I think if you start that question, the answer has to start with, do they get Arch Manning or not? You have to have a scenario where they have Arch Manning and when they don't. I think anytime you land the number one player in the class, you are in a mix to be the number one class in the country. Um, so let's do two scenarios here. Let's do a with Arch and without. With Arch, I think that the ceiling for this class could be as high as number one. I mean, if you look at kind of the math, I talked about the core four earlier this week of Arch,
Mhm.
Ruben Owens, Jonte Cook, Anthony Hill. If they could get those four guys, you're well on your way. You've established kind of the foundation for that number one class. Even if you can get three of them. So I think maybe you could turn the hide with David, or turn the tables with David Hicks. You get in the picture for a guy like Cedric Baxter and some more nationally ranked prospects. I think that the ceiling for that class is number one. I think that um, without Arch, it's going to be hard to get there. I think it's even going to be hard to be a top five class. Frankly, I mean, it just
Absolutely.
because not to say that you lose all those other guys, but I just think that getting Arch gives you such a better chance with the Ruben Owens and Jonte Cooks of the world. And without those guys, it's hard to climb to number five. Now they did it last year in a year when nobody thought they could get into that top five range. So it's hard to count the staff out. But I think a lot also depends on the season. Another 5-7 season, and then I think you're very much in trouble. But I think the ceiling for this class without Arch, you're hoping you get in the top 10 at that point, especially because it'll probably be smaller numbers, so you're not going to have the big numbers to build up on. But with Arch, I think sky's the limit.
Absolutely, Mike. I think that with Arch, it is a top class ceiling. Do I, if I'm a betting man, and would I put money on it being the number one class? No, because right now it's just hard to look at the nationally elite guys that you normally need for a number one class. So right now, I wouldn't bet that with Arch it would be the number one, but that's absolutely the ceiling, because with Arch, then it probably gives you a little bit of a boost. You get more guys on campus, and then all of a sudden, say a like you mentioned, Cedric Baxter as a potential, running back as part of one of two, or even like a Francis, Malioga from IMG Academy. That's a 5-star. Maybe they could really pick it up and land. So that's the ceiling. But like you kind of hinted at, I think that one thing that is going to kind of lower the ceiling, I'm not sure they have the numbers to make the number one class push. And especially if they don't end up with Arch, I think that top 10 would be, if they don't land Arch, I think getting top 10 would be some borderline, A plus recruiting, which is, a little bit on the downside, but that just goes to show how high of a variance, his recruitment is, and how ultimately important it is. And so, yeah, I think that top one is the ceiling with Arch, with top three as a very safe kind of landing zone. And then without him, I think probably 10 to 15 is the ceiling.
I think it's really tricky. Your goal should be get in the top five, then get in the top three, and then figure it out from there. Because usually that 1, 2, 3 is all very closely tight together. And Texas could sign the class of their dreams and end up number two or number three, and there's still nothing to, shake a stick at. But if you look at kind of the recipe of how A&M did it last year, reaching the number one overall class and the highest ranked class, yes, they got Connor Wigman and Evan Stewart and a lot of the highly ranked guys in the state of Texas, which Texas could do conceivably. But can Texas go get a Walter Nolan,
Yeah.
a Shamar
Shamar
Stewart,
Stewart. Yeah.
guys like that in areas they typically don't succeed in? Those were the guys that helped push them over the top. And so that's what I think, could hold them back potentially from being that number one class. But who knows? I mean, we've seen a lot of the buzz around Arch, and I think it's a little different than it was because Malachi Nelson and Nicholas Alamaliva. I'm probably butchering his name, by the way, and I apologize for that. Uh, uh, because those guys have emerged, at one point in time, it was like Arch is the guy, the only guy. Everybody wants to follow him. Well, now you've got factions. You've got the guys who want to follow Malachi. You got the ones that want to follow Nicholas. You got guys who certainly want to follow Arch, but it's more split. You're kind of diverting that attention. So I do think that could potentially hurt it. And like I said, can Texas go do the extra things that A&M was able to do and go outside of the state into regions that normally don't come to Texas and go win elite prospects from those groups? I think that will probably ultimately hold the potential back or tell the story of them being the number one class if they can do those things.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that was a quick and dirty wrap up of the weekend, and or not wrap up. I'm sorry, preview of the weekend. We will do a wrap up show next week, and as well as preview the next weekend because it's going to be another big weekend, April
Back to
2nd.
back loaded weeks.
Yeah. Our next show may be done with me on a beach. I will be in Galveston next week, so it may be live from the beach when we record it. So we'll kind of see how that goes. But Hudson, anything you want to add before we leave?
Don't think so. All good. Go St. Peter's Peacocks. Let's get Purdue back.
Oh yeah. Do you have any tournament thoughts you want to get off before? If you could start from the Sweet 16 as it is now, who do you really like? I've got Gonzaga in the bracket. I think I still really like my pick of Gonzaga to win it all. What are your thoughts?
I've got Arizona in my bracket. I am very worried about this Arizona-Houston matchup. I've been telling a friend of the podcast, Guy Frazier, for a while, but Houston is a team that Vegas and the analytics nerds have loved all season, and the committee and a lot of the pollsters haven't really liked. And Houston's just responded by knocking off a really game 12 seed Alabama Birmingham team, and then just kind of punking Illinois in the round of 32. Arizona's only a 1-point favorite against Houston. I'm a little bit worried about my pick. I think the winner of that game has a really good path. And then the other one, Texas Tech versus Duke is just going to be a banger. That's an awesome college basketball matchup where you have Coach K's last run with a team full of, bona fide studs versus Texas Tech's no middle defense that has just been awesome all year. That's going to be a fun one. Gonzaga's a great pick. I'm going to stick with my bracket, stick with what I've thought for most of the year and say Arizona's going to win it all. But there's a decent chance that quite literally by podcast recording, or by the time people listen to this, that I'm wrong and the Houston Cougars are advancing to another Elite Eight.
All right. Well, we'll check back on our progress next week for see who's in the Final Four and who we like. It's been a fun tournament so far. So
it's been awesome.
All right, guys, we thank you for listening. We thank you for joining in on the fun. Thank you to Taylor Estes for doing everything behind the scenes to make this show run. For Hudson Standish, I'm Mike Roach. No, wait. For Hudson Standish, I'm Mike Roach, and we'll see you guys next week.